We're delighted to be here in the Attenborough Centre for Creative Arts at Sussex. And my name is Professor Sasha Roseneal. I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Sussex. And I would like to welcome you all, thank you all, for joining us for our annual Holocaust Memorial Day event, when we as a community remember the millions of people who perished in the Holocaust. Now, today's event has been organised not to discuss the horrific situation that's been unfolding in recent months, indeed is happening right now in Palestine and Israel, just as we're not here to talk specifically about other sites of contemporary war and conflict. But I would like to start by acknowledging the very real pain and distress in relation to the current conflict that's being experienced by many members of our university community, and no doubt by many of you attending today, who are not Sussex students or staff, people from a range of different backgrounds, but perhaps especially those with Israeli, Jewish, Palestinian, Arab or Muslim identities and beliefs, and with family and personal connections to Israel and Palestine. As a university, we don't take an institutional position on complex geopolitical events, but we do recognise that many in our community, both students and staff, and many of you visiting today, have strong views and feelings about the current conflict. Our position at Sussex is that we ask all members of our university community and everyone visiting our campus to hold in mind our shared humanity, whatever the differences of belief and lived experience there might be amongst us, and that we all consider carefully the impact of our words and actions on each other. At Sussex, we're committed to providing an inclusive, respectful and supportive learning and working environment for every member of our diverse and international community. And within our community, we strive to ensure that diversity of belief and opinion can be expressed and heard safely and legally, and we seek to facilitate dialogue between those with differing views. We're committed to rigorous, rational, evidenced argument and respectful discussion. We're a place for open debate. And we will not tolerate anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any form of racism, harassment or discrimination. Our commitment to academic freedom and freedom of speech within the law is foundational and is essential to our work of education and research. The theme for National Holocaust Memorial Day this year, which actually took place on the 27th of January, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, is the fragility of freedom. What I was just saying was that the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is the fragility of freedom. This is a reflection of how regimes of persecution often begin with slow and subtle, insidious erosion of personal liberty, the everyday freedoms that we take for granted until they're taken away. 90 years ago in Germany, shortly after the Nazis came to power, new legislation restricted the rights of the Jewish population to work in public service. More restrictions followed. As Holocaust victim Anne Frank listed in her diary in 1942, a series of anti-Jewish decrees in Nazi-occupied Netherlands had required Jews to give up their bicycles, banned them from trains, forbade them riding in cars, including their own cars, restricted when and where they could shop, denied them access to parks, cinemas and theatres. And so it continued to its terrible conclusion. As we now know, 6 million Jews were murdered, along with hundreds of thousands of other minority groups, including Roma and Sinti people, those deemed to be disabled, either mentally or physically, as well as lesbians, gay men and transgender people, Jehovah's Witnesses, trade unionists, and political opponents of the Nazi regime. As centres of learning, universities can bring insights from history, from sociology, from political theory, many other disciplines, to better understand where liberal democracy is most vulnerable. Universities can play a role in challenging threats to individual freedoms, and our research and scholarship are absolutely vital in this respect. Today we're honoured that Ivor Pearl, who is a Holocaust survivor, accepted our invitation to tell us about his experience. Ivor was born in 1932 in the Hungarian town of Mako and was 12 years old when he was taken to Auschwitz. He survived with the help of his older brother, Alec, but the rest of his family, including 7 of his siblings and his parents, were murdered. In 1945, Ivor and Alec managed to get on a transport to London and were given a new home. We also welcome Ivor's daughter Judy and his granddaughter Leah, who will help Ivor tell his story. Leah is a speaker for the Holocaust education charity, Generation to Generation, which empowers second and third generation Holocaust survivors and their close family and friends to present family histories to a wide range of audiences. They will be in conversation with Professor Gideon Rovernay, Director of the Sussex Weidenfeld Institute of Jewish Studies. The Institute seeks to make the historical Jewish experience relevant to some of the major issues of our day, such as the growing rise of religious intolerance, racism, and nationalism. For our second session this afternoon, we'll watch a taster of The Third Reich of Dreams, a documentary film still in pre-production and inspired by the writings of Charlotte Beradt, a German Jewish journalist who gathered accounts of the often prophetic dreams experienced by Germans in Berlin during the 1930s. This will be followed by a discussion with the film's director, Amanda Rubin, and will be chaired by Professor Ivor Gaber, Professor of Political Journalism here at Sussex. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my sincere thanks to the Association of Jewish Refugees for their support again this year. We welcome Alex Moores, who is their Head of Education and Heritage. The AJR has supported our event since 2001, when Holocaust Memorial Day was first officially marked in the UK's calendar. Our faculty and our students are here today as our students from many schools and colleges, more schools and colleges than ever before, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event. I'll now hand over to Gideon, who will introduce you to our guest speaker. Thank you.
Vice-Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, if you strolled along London's Oxford Street in February 1944, you would likely have encountered the War in Wax exhibition near Tottenham Court Road tube station. Outside the venue, a uniformed commissioner invited passersby with the announcement, "Visit the War in Wax exhibition. See the great Allied leaders and the horrors of the German concentration camp." Indeed, it may be surprising to learn that the horrors of the German concentration camp was the centerpiece of this exhibition. This makes it one of the earliest displays of Nazism atrocities open to the general public. Drawing on official British government sources, the horror of the German concentration camps exhibition was divided into 9 sections. Each section was meticulously crafted to depict the atrocities committed in these camps. In early 1944, the Mass Observation Project, whose extensive archives are held at our university, dispatched an observer to document visitors' reactions to this exhibition. Among the recorded comments was one from a 40-year-old woman who said, "They, the Germans, don't seem to have any human feeling. It doesn't seem possible for anybody with a spark of decency to do these things. They should exterminate the lot of them this time," she said. 2 70-year-old schoolgirls were quoted saying, "It's terrible. The Germans are dirty devils. It gives us the creeps to see what they do to people. It makes us feel funny that such things might have happened here if Hitler had had the chance. We should give them the dose of their own medicine." By mid-1946, Mass Observation recorded noticeably different reaction to the same exhibition. One male visitor remarked, "Shocking, isn't it? If I'd only knew what it was like, I wouldn't have come into this exhibition." Well, this is not the place to explore the reasons behind these differing responses. It is important to highlight a significant absence that there is no specific mention of who the victims of Nazi atrocities were in either the exhibition or the Mass Observation reports. The victims remain largely faceless, which, considering our current understanding of the central role Jewish persecution under National Socialism, is most striking. Indeed, since 1945, there has been a transformation in how we remember the war, particularly in relation to the Holocaust. Initially perceived as one among many wartime atrocities, the extermination of European Jews has increasingly become a central element in our understanding of the war itself. The establishment of a term specifically for this event, the Holocaust, highlights this change, acknowledging Jews as the primary victims of National Socialism. Crucially, this new understanding of the significance of the Holocaust represents a shift from earlier narratives that saw Jews mainly as a problem or a question, when you think about the Jewish question, towards a recognition of Jewish subjectivity. As memory of the Holocaust globalized, various groups have aligned their own victimhood narratives with it, sometimes leading to a competitive dynamic. The tendency to compare the experiences of suffering among different groups has not only risked overshadowing the unique aspects and historical context of each experience, but also reinforces the perception of Jews predominantly as victims. Consequently, any deviation from these victim roles, especially in the form of perceived Jewish transgression, poses a significant challenge to this established narrative framework. The events following last October serve as a stark example, sparking fears of reverting public discourse back to the times when Jews were predominantly perceived as a problem. As a university, our response to these concerns lie in our core strengths: conducting research, fostering learning, and creating platforms for open dialogue. These approaches allow for discussion of even more sensitive issues. Our commitment to research, learning, and dialogue is exemplified by our Holocaust Memorial Day. We take pride in how this event has expanded in both impact and importance over the years, reflecting our dedication to these core values. I would like then now to thank our Vice Chancellor for her warm welcome and for her unwavering support of our work during these challenging times. Organizing this event on behalf of the Weidenfeld Institute is Diana Franklin, to whom we owe a great deal of gratitude. I would also like to thank members of the Development and Alumni Relations Office for their invaluable assistance in bringing this event to fruition. Finally, I would like to thank our DAAD professor for Eastern European Jewish History, Katrin Stefan, for bringing to Sussex the exhibition Expelled on the history of the Polen Aktion in October 1938, which you probably saw in the entrance. Ruth Krai, head of the DAAD in London office, is with us today, and I would like to use this opportunity to thank her and the DAAD for their ongoing support of the university and the Weidenfeld Institute of Jewish Studies. I would like now to invite Alex Muse of the AJR to say a few words.
Thank you, Gideon. My name is Alex Mause from the Association of Jewish Refugees. We were founded in 1941. We are the organization that represents and cares for the UK's Holocaust refugees and survivors. We still have several hundred first-generation members. If you do the maths, you can imagine most of them are in their 80s, 90s, and 100s now. And I would just like to say on behalf of those members, thank you. Thank you, first of all, to the organizers of today's event, and thank you to all of you for attending today. It's your attendance at events like this that helps to keep the legacy of our members and their stories alive. The AJR is also the UK's largest funder of programs that aim to teach about and commemorate the Holocaust. And we've been proud to support this event that you've heard has been going on for over 20 years now. It's one of the oldest such events in the UK that commemorates the Holocaust, specifically at a university. I've come to this many times, and I've always been inspired and impressed by the combination of testimony and commemoration and academic discussion. I've been impressed by the fact that it involves the university community, but also the wider community, local schools and colleges as well. And I've always thought that this is really a model that I wish other universities would follow as well. I know it's a little strange at the outset of an event like this one to say, I hope you enjoy yourselves today. But I do hope that you find it challenging and thought-provoking. In our field of teaching and learning about the Holocaust, we often say that it's quite normal to leave with more questions than answers. And I know that I, for one, am looking forward to engaging in that very process with all of you today. So thank you.
So without further ado, I would like to invite Ivor and Leah to come to the stage and start their presentation.
One 2021. A number, a survivor, a story. My Papa, Ivor Pearl, his legacy.
My name is Ivor Pearl. In front of you is my gorgeous granddaughter Leah, who will take on a journey to hell and back, which is my life story. If there's one important thing to take away from my story, it's if society allows themselves to be brainwashed by hatred that can only lead to one thing, a destruction of civilization. And this, I'm talking from my personal experience.
Hello, I'm Leah. April 2018 is when it all changed for me. I visited Auschwitz for the first time with my Papa Ivor and Mother Judy. Papa is another word to me for grandfather. I've never felt such a mix of emotions. Standing on the railway tracks where my family once walked, I couldn't contain my tears, feeling the weight of their history and pain on my shoulders. This trip opened my eyes and ignited a fire inside of me. I am determined to carry forward my Papa's legacy in Holocaust education and to keep telling his story to the world. Before I continue, I just want to take this moment to let you know that there is content in this presentation that you may find upsetting. Ivor Pearl, born Yitzhak Perlmutter on the 4th of February 1932 in a southern Hungarian town called Machau that you can see on the map. It was around 10 miles from the Romanian border. There were around 1,000 Jews in the town of Machau, and they made up of approximately 5% of the population. Ivor grew up in a very Orthodox religious Jewish household where the men of the family spoke Yiddish, a language spoken by Central and Eastern European Jews.
I come from a family of 9 children, 5 brothers and 4 sisters, and their mother and father. And Alec is the 6th? I was the 7th. Yeah. That's right.
There were a total of 11 family members. From this family tree, with sketches of what Ivor's family would have looked like in 1944, we see Ferenc, Ivor's father, and his mother Rosa, then elder brothers and sisters, David, Mordechai, Razel, Bluma, Malka, 14-year-old Abraham, known as Alec in this story, then 12-year-old Yitzhak, my Papa, known as Ivor in this story, then his younger brother Moshe, and baby sister Fagla. From these 11 family members, Only Ivar and his brother Alec were to survive the Holocaust. The rest of the Perlmutter family were murdered alongside 6 million other Jews. The Holocaust was the systematic murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazis and their collaborators during World War II. Along with the murder of millions of others, it is one of history's most horrifying acts of mass murder and cruelty. Ivor remembers himself as a cheeky little boy living in a very happy home. Despite a happy home, anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jews, was never far away in Hungary and throughout Europe. This poster on the right is a call for Jews to fight against anti-Semitism in pre-war Hungary. Anti-Semitism was happening all over Europe, particularly in Germany, with the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazism, supported by their political paramilitary organisation known as the SS. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, the SS has more than 50,000 members. Nazism promoted extreme nationalism, racism, and the belief in a superiority of a particular Aryan race. This master race was Hitler's vision, with blonde hair, blue eyes, narrow noses, and fair skin, like the photo shown on the left. The Nazis implemented policies that resulted in anti-Jewish hatred reaching new heights in the 20s and 30s. The Jews were blamed for the deep economic depression following the First World War, and persecution of the Jews followed, even though they only represented 7% of the German population. This photo on the right from 1933, when Adolf Hitler came to power, shows place cards telling people to not buy from Jews. In 1935, the Nazis passed the Nuremberg Laws. One of the main laws said that Jews could no longer be German citizens and prohibited relationships between Jews and non-Jews. What followed was increased persecution and humiliation in Germany and throughout Europe. The Nazis and their collaborators subjected the Jewish populations to violent attacks and mass shootings. Here, Alec, Ivor's brother on the left, tells us what they heard was happening.
It's somehow in 1942, when the Germans were occupying more and more, and they became more anti-Semitic. It was the in thing to do, and they appointed in governments, the fascist governments, and they were sort of more or less giving the free card for the anti-Semites to have a go at Jews. And they started breaking windows and beating up children and rabbis on the street.
Hungary, where Alec and Ivor lived, was allied to Germany. And from 1939 to 1944, the Hungarians began to enact their own anti-Jewish laws, modelled on the Germans' Nuremberg laws. This resulted in Jews being stripped of Hungarian citizenships, excluded from various professions, barred from social activities, and eventually from owning their own businesses. However, the Hungarian regime resisted German attempts to deport the Jews of Hungary. In 1942, Ivor's father Ferenc and older brother Mordechai were sent to the forced labour battalion, where Hungarian Jews were forced to work in extreme, difficult conditions. My family, like other Hungarian Jews, began to hear rumours. Now my papa will explain what happened one day in 1943.
I remember where Jews, suddenly 3 or 4 Jews turned up at the synagogue, and they were claiming to be Polish Jews, and they were telling us stories about executions and murders, which, well, obviously we didn't want, not only to say we didn't want to believe, we just couldn't believe. And in fact, there was an argument going on to say, no, I think they're exaggerating, they want sympathy, they want us to give them charity and whatnot, but in actual fact it can't be. The stories they were telling us were too horrendous. But I suppose looking back, obviously, the amount of times that we've heard those stories, that more than likely we didn't want to believe they were happening.
In March 1944, the alliance between the Nazis and Hungary broke down and Nazi occupation began in Hungary.
The situation for the Jews, and actually for everyone, deteriorated a lot when Germany occupied Hungary. Germany, well, it's not giving a history here, but Hungary and Germany were allies, Axis power during the war, and the Germans were losing the war by that time. That was 1944, and Hungary wanted to get out as much as possible, try to make contact with the Allies, and the Germans found out about that, so they occupied. That's when they occupied Hungary, didn't they? Overnight,
They put in
and they put the fascist government in power, including with the Germans themselves, and that's when the persecution took on in earnest. That's when they had to start putting on stars, wearing stars, and that's when you couldn't remember starting in the ghetto. Gradually, you were herded into smaller and smaller area. You weren't allowed to fraternize with the non-Jewish people, and you weren't allowed to be in business.
Jews were forced to wear yellow stars, like in Germany and other German-occupied countries, and violence against the Jews increased. Ivor recalls putting boards in their home windows to prevent them from being smashed. Now you'll hear from Alec regarding the forced deportation in Hungary.
Suddenly a law came out that all Jews must assemble in the school and nobody must have more than 5 kilos of belongings with them. And they'll be transported to work or whatever. They made some sort of a thing. Of course, we all obeyed like lambs to the slaughter.
By April 1944, Jewish people throughout Hungary were forced to pack up their homes and moved into restricted areas called ghettos, where they lived in dreadful conditions. The Perlmutters had to write an inventory of everything in their possession. This image shows each item in their home written in Hungarian, from kitchen towels to clothes to a candle. It wasn't much, but it was plenty for them back then. The Perlmutters heard they may be on the move again shortly. You'll now hear from my Papa Ivor as he describes Rosa, his mother, who cooked a chicken soup in their home, since no one knew when they would eat again. You may not realise how important chicken soup is to the Jewish diet.
About this chicken soup, do you remember before we were taken away, or rather before we left home, going onto the cattle tracks, my mother made a chicken soup. Do you remember that? To take it with on a journey. And we wanted, he said, no, we've taken this on journey because I'm sure we'll need it on the journey. And we were in this football stadium, or the football pitch. Stadium, it wasn't a stadium there.
It was just a
football pitch. And we were sheltering under a tree because it was also sunny. It was in May. It was very hot, also quite warm, which is warm that part of Hungary. And when it was time to go, we all left. We were herded into this cattle track, and suddenly my mother let out a bit of a
Scream.
wail, a scream. So what happened? What happened? We left the chicken soup behind. And of course, many a times, for days, for the following days, while we were in the cattle truck, when we were absolutely starving, that bit of soup wouldn't have come in useful.
As Ivor just recalled, that chicken soup under the tree really would have been a godsend later on. That's all he could think about while squashed in the cattle trucks, where there was barely any room to move or breathe. 20 miles later, the cattle truck arrived at Szeged, Hungary. This map shows the location of the ghetto where the Perlmutters were forced to stay. A very large ghetto overcrowded with thousands of people. The conditions here were a lot worse than the ghetto they were in before. They stayed there for another few days before it was announced that the first transport to the new resettlement departed the following morning. Ivor and his family eagerly awaited for the next morning to come. they thought anything could be better than where they currently were. In Ivor's words, little did we know, looking back, that place was heaven compared to what awaited us. On the 25th of June 1944, the Perlmutters were once again forcibly crammed onto a train with cattle wagons. Ivor, who was only 12 years old, began the journey with a glimmer of hope, but this optimism swiftly faded into despair during the grueling 4-day passage. Packed tightly together, they endured appalling conditions, squashed together with just a small bucket to relieve themselves, no food, and very little water. After this long journey, they finally arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in German-occupied Poland. The scene that unfolded before them was full of commotion and shouting. My papa describes what he heard and saw.
As you can imagine, for 4 days, being on the train like that, there's 70, 80 people. We arrived at weather like this, absolutely stifling hot. And of course, as the train stopped, German guards kept on going past, any sick people on board. I remember falling down on the floor, holding my head, and then suddenly I opened my eye, and I could see what happened. All these thousands of people, women and children one side, men the other side, kept on pointing left and right, left and right.
Now Ivor will explain what happened as they started to get off the cattle trucks.
Loads of people, loads of dogs, loads of guards, and a lot of people with striped uniforms on, and kept on shouting in Yiddish, which fortunately we spoke, as I said earlier, saying that eat up all your food, don't save any food, eat up all your food, and the children must say you're older than you are. You must say you're older than you are.
The SS guards began to shout, "Get in a line, men and boys one side, women and children the other." Ivor was separated from his mother, 4 sisters and little brother. At the time, Ivor didn't realise that that would have been the last time he ever saw his mother and his siblings, 15-year-old Malka, 10-year-old Moishe and 4-year-old Fegele. 12-year-old Ivor was greeted sternly by a man in white gloves who asked him how old he was. My papa remembered being told to say you were 16 years old, so he said he was 16. The guard paused for a second whilst my papa's heart was racing. The white gloves pointed to the right. That day, my papa got to live. After having all their belongings taken from them by the guards, 12-year-old Ivor, together with his 2 older brothers, Alec, aged 14, and David, aged 21, were marched into the camp. They were instructed to undress, sprayed with water, and had their heads shaved. This marked their final shower until liberation a year later. The Nazis sold the shorn hair to German firms as raw material. The image on the right is from the current Auschwitz Museum, showing 2,000 kilograms of some of this hair. After the showers, they were handed their striped uniform, which little did they know was to last them until liberation. Inside the camp, Ivor could see dozens of huge barracks, divided by double electrified barbed fences, with about 4 meters high, with watchtowers every 100 yards. With large machine guns pointing out of them. Inside the barrack, Ivor was absolutely horrified. Long tiered bunks with wooden slats either side, with a raised platform in the middle for sleeping. I'm now going to play a clip from 2018 when I accompanied my papa and mother to Auschwitz for the first time, and we go back to one of the barracks very similar to where my papa and brothers were kept. By the time my papa left Auschwitz, there was nearly 1,000 people to one barrack.
You see, 700
Yeah.
people in one.
Yeah, 700 people in a block. And towards the end, 1,000.
And did you just sleep on this?
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, this is the quite sort of modern compared to what I remember our house was. Because this is brick built, ours was wooden built.
I just tried to imagine what it must have been like. And I asked him how many to a bunk, and he said as many as you could fit in. And Leah thought that, you know, that they had something here, maybe straw or something. No, I mean, it's just like you see photos. But until you see it, I suppose, you know, and you put it into context.
Soon after, Alec and Ivor's brother David was separated from them into another barrack. This was the last time they ever saw their brother David. In the camps, they were told, "You have arrived at Auschwitz. You are not a person. You do not have a name, but will each be given a number that you must never forget. Forget that number, and you do not exist." Ivor, just 12 years old, remembers this sentence until today. He was so frightened and just wanted his mother. Every prisoner was given a number, and the majority had that number tattooed onto their skin, like the image shown. Ivor, however, was, shall we say, lucky. Despite queuing to have this number burned onto his skin, it never happened. But Ivor's number, 112021, is a number that till this day still haunts him, and he can never, ever forget it. Every day, the prisoners were marched and forced to work. The SS guards would often pick out random people and beat them for no reason. All they were given to digest most days was one small cup of coffee, one slice of tiny stale bread, and a watery soup. Once a week, they were sometimes given a thin slice of margarine. The photo of the bowl and mug shown here have been preserved from Auschwitz. While working, 12-year-old Ivor spotted distant smoke, and prisoners would often endure a foul stench, which he soon realised were the crematoria, where gas chamber victims were burnt to erase any evidence. These photos show a variety of crematoria from different concentration camps. The gas chambers at Auschwitz were destroyed by the Nazis, so I visited a similar version on my trip. As I stood in the confines of that gas chamber, the chilling silence surrounded me, and yet what went on in those gas chambers was probably far from silent. I stood alone, too painful for my papa or mother to even imagine. Tears ran down my face as I contemplated the immense suffering that had taken place here, likely my family suffering. In that moment, I realised I wasn't just a visitor like most people that would come and go through that door, but a bearer of a legacy. Ivor and Alec volunteered on some Sundays to earn extra food in the camps, assisting in the kitchens and allowed to lick the food bowls the SS guards would eat from. One Sunday, walking towards Ivor and Alec were their two sisters, Rachel and Bluma. They were overjoyed to see each other, but of course there was no sign of his mother or siblings. Rachel and Bluma hid the truth that they had been taken away and murdered in the gas chamber. After a little while, they kissed each other goodbye and said, "If possible, we'll meet up again." This was the last time Ivor and Alec ever saw their two sisters. Now you'll hear from Ivor about one Sunday while working in the SS guard kitchen and the air raid siren sounded.
We had to go into the barrack. We ended up in a block where the only children were there. And when they all clear siren sounded, we were, the doors of the barrack would not open up. And we kept on shouting, "Why don't you open the door and let us out?" But what happened was suddenly 2 or 3 German, I think, doctors arrived in the barrack with white coats. You could see they were doctors, and we had to undress ourselves and walk in front of them to point out which of us were able to work, which were not able to work. And there's such a lot of commotion going on, and it's running, children running backwards and forwards. They just couldn't cope with it. They went out and they locked the gate altogether. And my brother didn't realize where I was. Somehow or other, I'm not quite sure how, he managed to persuade me to escape through a window at the top. Although I was very, very worried to do anything like it. I'm not quite sure how, but he managed to escape, to help me out from that block. And during the night, we heard an awful lot of commotions with lorries turning, running. And the following morning, we woke up and we found that the whole block of Children's Block were emptied. And during the night, they were all taken to the gas chamber. If my brother would not have been there to save me, that was the second time, I certainly would have faced certain death.
After a few months in Auschwitz had painfully passed, and Ivar's skin turned and with lice covering him, he was wandering around the camps one day when he froze in his tracks and could not believe his eyes. There stood his father, Ferenc.
I did meet my father in Auschwitz, surprisingly enough. And I remember walking along with my brother, and my brother said to me, "Look, Daddy's here." I said, Where? But I feel so sad that I remember walking with him, holding my hand and my brother's hand, and I was talking to my brother. He hardly said anything to me. And I felt as though I wish I could ask him or talk to him. But then I thought to myself, what must he have felt holding my hand, 12 years old there, not being able to protect him?
And those were the last moments you shared together?
Yeah. Yes.
By January 1945, the Russian army were getting nearer to Auschwitz, so the guards moved the prisoners out of the camp. They began destroying anything that left a trace of the inhumane acts they had committed. 12-year-old Ivar and 14-year-old Alec, once again inside the cattle trucks, enduring the same dreadful circumstances as before for 4.5 days. Eventually, their journey led them to Kaufering 4 Herlach, located in Germany, which served as a sub-camp under the Dachau concentration camp. The conditions in this place were beyond dreadful, resulting in the loss of approximately half the 30,000 prisoners due to the chilling cold, agonizing hunger, rampant diseases, and ruthless executions. Seeing dead, lifeless bodies lying around the camps became a daily sight for Ivar. He always knew when someone had died in his barrack, as the lice and fleas that usually infested him would suddenly disappear. Ivar recalls always seeing wheelbarrows with dead or very sick people in them. Forced to work in freezing conditions, by now Ivar was in a dreadful state, and things became so bad that some days he would look for grass or roots to eat. Due to the conditions, fleas, and lack of hygiene, Ivar became very sick, with typhus, a condition very few people survive as it is so brutal. Ivar was sent straight to the sick block. Here, very few prisoners ever returned. Shown in red was the sick blocks at Kaufering 4 Dachau concentration camp. One day, Alec appeared with a friend to the sick block. They proceeded to put Ivar on their shoulders, as Ivar had no energy to stand, let alone walk. They carried him out and told the SS guards at the door that they were taking him to the toilet. Next thing Ivar recalls, he was back in his barrack. Ivar's 13th birthday, the 4th of February, was fast approaching, which in the Jewish religion is a very special age. The age to be bar mitzvahed, which is a huge coming-of-age ceremony for Jewish boys. Ivar thought about this day for many years, and he would never have imagined it would have been spent behind barbed wires as a prisoner. Then in late April 1945, the German guards, afraid of the Allied troops and wanting to destroy the evidence of their evil, started to march the prisoners out of the camp. This is known as a death march. They marched through many German villages where people would stand outside their homes. You would have thought for a second, maybe, just maybe, they would throw these innocent false prisoners some food or attempt to help these skeleton, fragile-looking people. For example, Ivor weighed just 7 stone. Wrong. This video shows Ivor explaining what he remembers.
In a number of instances, the villagers came out and started spitting at us, throwing stone at us. I mean, this was already towards the end of the war, and how they can claim that they didn't know what was happening is beyond me. Because to see those literally thousands of people of skin and bone marching along there, and they're still coming along and abusing us, well, it's just beyond belief. But on the march, I think for about 5 or 6 days, and we remember being stopped in various parts of forest in the middle of the night, and also in the cold as well, and trying the thought of escape. But I'm sure by that time we could hardly walk. I mean, I don't know how even thought about of escaping.
Many people did not complete the journey. They either died of exhaustion or were shot by the guards. Those remaining arrived at Dachau concentration camp. The following day, late April 1945, Ivor heard a loud noise. The shells began to fall. Ivor and Alec waited a few minutes to see if any gunshots would go off. They didn't. Ivor and Alec climbed through the fallen fences. They ran with any fight they had left in them for their lives, literally. Those that were too weak to escape from the camp were discovered by the American Army.
Open it up, sir. Stand back. Give us some room here. Stand back. Back.
The soldiers cautiously entered the camp, and what they witnessed is a haunting and deeply disturbing sight. Their shocked expression as the soldiers began to realize the full extent of the atrocities committed by the Nazis and their collaborators.
Look at their arms. Like cattle.
These last 2 videos shown is from a series called Band of Brothers. In May 1945, Ivor and Alec, searching for food, encountered some Americans working for the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. They advised them to go to a displaced persons camp for safety. Reluctantly agreeing, there they had their first hot bath and fresh clothes since April 1944. The document on the left shows Ivor and his weight at 13 years old after gaining some additional weight back at the camp, yet it remained at just 7.9 stone, 50 kilograms. This photo shows the identity card given to Ivor. After a couple of weeks, once Ivor and Alec gained a little strength, they made inquiries about their family. It didn't take long for the Red Cross to get back to Ivor and Alec with the sad but not surprising news that no one else in their family survived the concentration camps. Ivor and Alec were absolutely heartbroken. Out of 11 family members, only Ivor and Alec survived. I'd like to take this moment to remember their names. If we observed a minute of silence for each Jewish life lost in the Holocaust, our silence would last 11.5 years. Apart from the 6 million Jewish victims, there were also many non-Jewish victims, such as Romas, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, political protesters, and people from ethnic minority backgrounds. They were targeted by the Nazis because of their perceived undesirable characteristics. It's important to remember that the Holocaust was a crime against humanity that affected a diverse range of people, and we must honour the memory of all its victims. Sadly, there are groups on this list that today still face prejudice. Mid-October 1945, Ivor and Alec were planning on returning to Hungary. However, after finding out that all their family had been murdered, they didn't want to return. They wanted to get on the first plane out of that hellhole. Early November, a Jewish community in England managed to arrange the safe passage of 900 young people. Ivor, aged 13, and Alec, aged 15, arrived in Southampton, England. They spent time there, also in Ascot and then Manchester, learning and studying whilst being supported by a refugee committee. Finally, they moved to Hackney in East London. Ivor found work in the clothing trade. He changed his name from Yitzhak Perlmutter to Ivor Pearl. He felt he needed a new identity, a new start in life. Ivor was 19 years old when he was introduced to a young lady, Rhoda, and enjoyed their first date so much that they continued to see each other, and the rest was history. Fast forward to the 18th of January 1953, my Papa Ivor and my Nana Rhoda married at Shoreditch Town Hall. The pearls were official. Ivor built a successful manufacturing fashion business in Adler Street at the age of 21 called Rovey Fashions, where it was so successful he was able to retire early. Ivor and Rhoda travelled all around the world together, making amazing memories. They went on to have 4 children, 3 girls and 1 boy, all named after some of my Papa's siblings. Alec, my kind, loving great uncle, Ivor's brother, sadly passed away with cancer in 2003. My Papa not only lost his brother and best friend, but also the person who saved him many times from death. My beautiful Nana Rhoda, Ivor's wife, sadly passed away in 2016, having suffered with dementia for many years. Dealing with both these losses proved to be an immense challenge for my Papa, as you can imagine. It had been an extended period of time since he had experienced the pain of losing a loved one, and many of the agonising memories from the concentration camps resurfaced once more. However, Ivor possesses a resilient spirit. He stands as the most mentally robust individual I have ever encountered. He gathers his strengths and continues to move forward despite the hardships. He truly is my hero. Ivor rightfully received his British Empire Medal and title from Queen Elizabeth in 2019 for dedicating his life to educating others about the Holocaust and telling his story to the world. Fast forward to today, 2024. Ivor has 6 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, and he is 92 years old and thriving. In 1999, after keeping silent about Ivor's Holocaust experiences for around 5 decades, my Nana encouraged him to document his story for the benefit of my family, who knew very little about his traumatic start in life. In 2023, Ivor republished his book for the world to read his full story. You now understand the significance of the title, Chicken Soup Under the Tree. You should leave this room today understanding the importance of remembering the Holocaust and actively contribute towards a world that embraces diversity and encourages greater tolerance and inclusivity. Now I'll share with you 3 principles that Ivor firmly believes in life.
Do not be a bystander ever to any kind of racism or prejudice, including anti-Semitism. No matter how many times you get knocked down, pick yourself up and try your best to carry on. If I can do it, you can. It is far better and easier to love than to hate.
Thank you for listening. I would now like to give you the opportunity to ask Ivor or myself any questions.
Thank you, Leah, for this really fascinating presentation. One says that every family, every Holocaust survivor family has one person that is basically designated to carry on the story. We call this person the family candle. It seems that you are your family's candle. So now we have the opportunity to ask Ivor questions. I'll simply ask you to raise your hand and direct also your questions to Ivor's experiences and not evolve any other issues with your questions. So please.
Please. Could I make one suggestion? Not if possible, I definitely would not want any political questions involved.
Sure.
Purely humanity.
So have you been back to Hungary?
Yes, having gone back to Hungary again, once again with my children. I think the question should be is, why was I hating to go back to Hungary more than to Germany? That's the question. We went to a place called Szeged, which is the nearest town there. We stayed in a hotel and I was overlooking beautiful scenery. And I thought to myself, I just came back from the place where we lived. How could I think back about it? It was a hallowed place, a hallowed ground. It was an old, dirty little street in a village. Somehow or other, a pain has lifted from my shoulders. It might make sense. But I wonder if I can ask you some questions. Can you tell me when did the Holocaust start? Come on, you've got an awful lot of students in the university college. Somebody must come forward. Can anybody? Somebody must come up with a figure, surely. Pardon? I can't hear.
Systematic annihilation in 1941.
I know, but I'm saying, that was the actual happening. But the actual Holocaust itself started hundreds of years ago. All Hitler did gave people permission to do what they wanted to do with hatred. So that's what I said at the end. I think hatred is not the way forward. And in fact, quite often, when we had 1 or 2 occasions to have taken revenge on the Nazi guards in Germany, in the camps itself, and I didn't have the heart to do it. At times I was ashamed of it, but then again I think to myself, well, I don't know, why should I be something like them?
Any other question? Over here.
Your story suddenly came even more alive to me at one point, right at the very end, when you and I apparently arrived in Hackney at the same time. I was born and you arrived as a refugee. I'd be absolutely fascinated if you could just give us a few sentences about what it was like to arrive in Hackney. Were we, the non-Jewish population, friendly? Did we understand what you'd been through? I'd just be interested to hear for a few minutes.
Wonderful question. But not only Hackney, but I think when I arrived in England, I thought I arrived in heaven. I mean, when people can't imagine the life that was back in East Europe. And then coming back to England, I thought, this must be heaven. And of course, we had very, very fortunate that the Jewish Refugee Committee, the forerunner of the Jewish Care, looked after us very, very well. Well, having said that, they looked after us on one condition. They were giving us help to educate ourselves, to look after ourselves. But the minute we can stand up and run, we've got to, you know, we have to take care of ourselves, not to be a burden to anyone else. Which I'm pleased to say I think I did. But of course, Hackney, any part of that looked lovely.
I see a question over there.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared. It's very powerful. I wonder if I could ask if you've had any contact with the people in the village that you came from in Marco.
I've been asking an awful lot of questions. Never that question before. But we did go back to the town once. My brother, who's 2 years older than I am, he can remember much more than I can. And he confronted one of the boys. Surprisingly enough, 3 weeks before we were taken to the ghetto, we were playing with non-Jewish friends. I mean, you know, the imagination of what happened is unbelievable. And we went back after the war, and my brother met him, and he said, how could you do that to us? We were playing friends, we were friends. I mean, all right, we were Jews, you were Christian, we didn't like you didn't like us, but we lived together. And he said, all we knew was that we loved, it's like the equivalent of Boy Scouts. The sergeant told the boys, the non-Jewish boys, congregate Monday morning and bring a stick with you, and we give you the equivalent of 10 shillings, herding the Jews into the ghetto. After them to them, well, what can you do? You come along and do that. But I think that I'm not so sure about the hatred. Well, I think, yes, I can say that. I think they seem to have hated us more than loved them family. In fact, I can go something even further. I remember demonstrations, or peasant demonstrations on Hungarian town hall in 1944. The demonstrators were peasants in skirts right down, made from sacks of onions or whatnot. What they've been demonstrating is, why doesn't the government bring back the injured soldiers from the Russian front? Because Hungary was the Axis power of Germany. And they said, we can't bring them back because we haven't got the infrastructure to bring them back from the Russian front back to Hungary. 2 weeks later, they had an infrastructure to take 400,000 Jews to their death. When I heard that, I was about 14 years old. I thought to myself, how can possibly any society hate someone else more than love their own ones? I would like to hear the answer from you.
Do we have time for one more question? Yes?
I'd like to ask you if you have anything that you'd like to say to the future, to the unborn children, who they will have a very abstract experience of this. So would you add anything to the future generations to help them understand?
Well, it's also the most difficult question to answer. I can only say it for myself, having proven for myself, like I said at the end of the result, that love will get you further than hate. It might be a quicker junk food to relieve yourself of hate, but in the long run, love will get you much further. That's including marriage. But I think the answer is so important that I keep asking that question the other way. What has the world learned from us since giving all the talk that we've been giving? And they are giving talk about the Holocaust, trying not to bring politics into it. What has the world learned? I mean, how much more can you teach the world to what happens to people who hate so much what's been happening? I think the only answer I can give you is possibly when I hear the lid on my coffin, maybe I can ask the maker, maybe I'll get the answer from him. But the question is very, 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 very important.
Okay, we'll stop here, but we'll have an opportunity to continue talking to Ivor and Leah over a break with a coffee. And if Leah will show again the book, I think Ivor will even sign books in the entrance. So I would like to invite everyone to thank Ivor and Leah for coming to Sussex and sharing this really important story and experience with us. Thank you so much for coming.